Hi, you've tuned into CKUW 95.9 FM here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm Tammy Wolf, the host of Truth Before Reconciliation, and I just kind of wanted to start the show off today by letting the listeners know that we are going to be doing something a little bit different in the next couple of weeks here. So I guess due to some of the circumstances that have kind of uncovered themselves within the past few weeks here in Winnipeg, namely the death of Jana Williams, who was found murdered here in Winnipeg, I've decided to do a series of shows within the next couple of weeks that are going to focus on MMIWG2S. I think it's very important to really highlight the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. I know that if you've been tuning into Truth Before Reconciliation, you do know that my background, I have lived experience. My master's thesis research is looking at MMIWG2S. And so I really found that right now it's a super important time to be really digging deeper into this issue. We only have half an hour. And so I thought this series, bringing together a few different speakers on this topic, would be great. So please continue tuning in. And I'd like to welcome my first guest, Sandra Delaronde. She is a fairly predominant figure within the community doing work and activism on MMIWG2S. So I'd like to welcome you, Sandra, and maybe you can just kind of start us off with introducing yourself and telling the listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, thank you, Tammy, for that introduction. And I'm really excited that you will be doing a series on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse people. I think it's important that the more people know, the more we can all collectively turn the tide on the matter and support families and loved ones. So I come to this work around MMIWG from I guess an early traumatic event, and many of us are really informed by those events in our childhood, right? That inform and guide your walk. And for me, it was for Helen Biddy Osborne, growing up in the PA and being a girl at the time. And my mother, Kathleen, is from Pimicikamat Cree Nation. And of course, Helen Biddy Osborne had and has relatives that are resident in the First Nation. So at the time, the residential school at Guy Hill had just closed down, and they had moved the students from the residential school into the community and were living with homes with family members. So and Helen Biddy was one of those students who were moved from the residential school to the community. Mm-hmm. So she was murdered by 4 white men, or 3 white men and 1 Métis man. And I remember her friends coming to my mother's house, well, my parents' house, as a place of safety. And I remember the young girls sitting around the table and my mother serving tea and bannock, and just being a place where they could sit and feel safe. Mm-hmm. But because of the incident and the fear, none of us were allowed in the room when they were talking, but I was always kind of a kid that would like to hear what was going on, right? So I kind of hung around the corner and listened, hopefully without being seen. And was totally shocked and in fear of what they had shared, and I could feel and sense their fear as well. And it and then of course there was a lot of conversation around the community about who it could be.
Right.
Uh, so I know for myself, for many years, when I would go to the arena to skate, the best times girls could get at that time was like at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I came from a large family, so if I was going to go skate at 6 o'clock in the morning, I had to get myself there, right? So
Mhm.
that was um, very fearful, because whenever I would see a car coming down the street, I would just like dive into the ditch, right, and wait until the car passed, and then I would get up and go make my way to the arena. It was such a normal thing for many years. And then I realized, a lot of people talk about the town of the Pas, um, and not say anything about the surrounding communities like the local government district or Opaskwatt Cree Nation. I think we have to understand that Helen Betty Osborne came from a family that was really impoverished, right?
Right.
And didn't have really anyone to speak for her. And so whether it was, advocates at the time or her community, there wasn't much said or not much advocacy in it. But the fact remained that that case still um, captured people, right? And really, it was a legacy for the pond surrounding area on how systems fail Indigenous women and girls. Um, so I think, or I believe it was the strength of Helen Betty Osborne's spirit that spoke to the hearts and minds of people to keep her case alive until justice was found.
Mhm.
So all that being said, there's also for families of MMIWG, the cultural practice, where you don't speak about a loved one that has gone on to the next world,
Mhm.
and so that their spirit might rest, right? So that um, that was first and foremost, and I think the family's ability uh, to advocate for her. Um, so every time that her mother Justine was pulled out of into the public, it was a real challenge for her to speak of her daughter.
Mhm.
Um, so it's hard to. It was a challenge, I think, to balance what those cultural needs and norms were of the family to the need to achieve justice
Right.
for her. So, and again, I think it did come down to the strength of her spirit. And 18 years later, um, the case was resolved or broke open, I guess.
Right.
And those players that were initially um, identified within hours after her murder were the same people that were identified 18
Right.
years later.
Mhm.
And also want to acknowledge um, corporal, I think, Corporal Bob Urbanowski, who was the RCMP officer who was credited with breaking open that case.
Right.
So then I know through my work in my lifetime that has been the most unsettling piece of that has really guided me in kind of the work I have done in the advocacy required for justice.
Right.
Um, so that's that piece.
For sure. Well, it's a
Yeah,
big piece, right? It's a
yeah,
huge piece. I mean, I think when we look at, because I mean, there's such a surge right now, right? There's this huge movement. I think it's really kind of picked up steam within the last few years. But I mean, obviously, as you're telling us, you've been doing this for some time, right? And her name is very, it's there with it, with the issue of MMIWG. She's kind of like one of the first people. I mean, her death was what also spurred the RCAP, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report.
yes, and it was also one of the separate cases that were reviewed as part of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry in Manitoba. And when that report was released in 1991, its fundamental finding of the inquiry was that Helen Betty Osborne would not have been murdered had she not been an Aboriginal woman.
Right.
And so then we look at the report and recommendations of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry of Manitoba and further reports going through, up to present day, such as
Right.
the Royal Commission and the Stolen Sisters report that was done by Amnesty International, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, who
Right.
also identified, the matter of missing and murdered Indigenous women as one of the kind of out kind of one of the things that had occurred as a result of residential school. And for Helen,
Right.
of course, case, you can make those direct links. But what we found is through successive reports based on that one finding that governments and systems have failed to act and create change in how they do things.
Right.
And yeah, so then as a result, we find that there has been a surge, that comes, ebbs and flows, but mostly flows with the deaths, the murders, and the number of Indigenous women and girls that go missing, because
Right.
there's been a failure to act and to implement those learned recommendations from 1991 to now. We have the report on the National Inquiry
Right.
that 231 recommendate or calls to justice, and that failure to act by governments and institutions basically gives perpetrators the signal that it's okay to continue to remove
Right.
Indigenous women and girls from their families and communities.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, really looking at, I mean, in my own research, I mean, I can think of countless names, right? So when we talk about somebody like Helen Betty Osborne, there's just so many other names that go with that, right? Like she may be that first name within history that people are recognizing, but we're a few weeks ago with Jana Williams, right? And I know that a lot of people right now are hearing that name and what has happened to her. So really that impact that Helen Betty Osborne created has been that advocacy movement, that moving in the right direction to kind of look, I guess, find solutions, looking for solutions. One of the things that I did want to ask you or talk to you about is just looking broadly at the issue of MMIWG. What do you think what are some truths that you would like to share with people? Because I know there's a lot of misconceptions. I know there's a lot of stereotypes. I know that there's a lot of misinformation that has been kind of pulled out and drawn from what's happening right now.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that from 2014 to last year, 2020, I had served as one of the co-chairs of the MMIWG Manitoba Coalition. And basically our work had centered around supporting families and victims in the call for a national inquiry into the matter. And then continuing to advocate for an open space for families and victims to have their voices heard, that the inquiry be centered around their needs.
Right.
And so that was done, with the openness of the commissioners. And it was, sometimes we went toe to toe, and in the end, we found a space that was comfortable for families and victims and for policymakers, because it's my understanding that this is the only time in history that really there's been a focus on Indigenous women and girls. And there probably will not be another one in our lifetime or generations to come. So it's important and critical that we look at the bold findings of the commission to say that, their primary finding, their finding of genocide, not couched in cultural or ethnic genocide, but just genocide, is really a critical piece of moving forward, for governments and institutions to understand that their policies and practices are based on genocidal policies and implementation and practices. We can't move past that. And so when we say that, there's an opportunity for reconciliation, there's an opportunity to accept that as a fact, and then look at ways through the 231 calls to justice that we can move the matter forward, so women and girls and gender diverse people can be safe, not just feel safe, but be safe. I think society looks at Indigenous women and girls as being vulnerable, but if we look at some of the testimony that was provided to the inquiry, specifically Dr. Barry Lavalley's, Indigenous women and girls are not vulnerable, they are targeted.
Right.
And we see that particularly in Winnipeg, with
For sure.
the latest deaths or homicides that have occurred. There's a feeling that, maybe the police are not looking at this in the right way. Maybe there is a serial killer or serial killers here in the city of Winnipeg. And
Sean is a good example.
Yeah. I mean,
who was found by them, but
there's not much difference in what had happened to her than what happened to Tina Fontaine and many, many others.
So many others.
Yeah. So I think that there has to be a much better way of implementing and certainly building trust in the community
For sure.
between the police and the community.
Definitely.
Because if the police are not protecting women and girls, whether it's in those situations or situations of domestic violence, if those systems that are meant to protect are not protecting, then where do women go?
Right. For sure. You've made some super just huge points, right? Like genocide, it's not just our identities, our culture, it's actual full-on genocide, like actual structured genocide on Indigenous women in this country. Yeah, and the issue of policing and targeting, definitely some really good points that people need to look at. We are kind of getting closer to the end of the show. So definitely I'm wanting to talk about your course that you're teaching at the University of Winnipeg. So for those of you who don't know, Sandra actually is, I think it's the first of its kind across Canada. Her course is called 231 Calls to Justice. So I thought maybe you could tell the listeners a little bit more about that, where they can hear some more great stuff from you.
Okay, thanks. Well, we did offer a course in the winter session, and basically the idea of the course is to build capacity in the community to implement the 231 Calls to Justice. So whether you're an individual or work for an organization, and it's being offered for credit at the Masters in Development Practice Indigenous Development Program.
Right.
I think it's 3 credit hours, I think. So, and it's a special topics course, and it will be offered this spring from May 5th to July 31st from 5:30 to 8:30. So it won't be as intense as the whole weekends we had last year.
Right, which I was a part of.
Yes, which you were a part of. So, I think that people in the master's program, or if they're taking a certificate program, are people that are really either involved or going to be involved in reshaping policy in this province, in this country, and
Right.
to have a firm grounding in what does the 231 Calls to Justice mean, and how can they create safer spaces based on those calls,
Right.
is really I'm hoping is the outcome of taking the course.
For sure. Definitely.
So to register, people can just go to the UW website, or they can contact Tamara Dion Stout at, 204-297-2860 at the University of Winnipeg.
Perfect. So I will definitely also provide that information on the Truth Before Reconciliation page on social media. So if you're not following us already, please go to Truth Before Reconciliation on Facebook. I will get a poster from Sandra or something from MDP, because that's the sister program to my program, my MAG program that I'm currently in at the university. So I guess kind of looking more towards other solutions. So we'd love for you guys to come and take this course. I can attest, I was part of the very first cohort. I was super excited to take this course. So in addition to taking this course, what are some suggestions for people out there who might want to get out there and help and take some action to try to help find solutions to address this crisis of MMIWG2S?
I think there's many things they could do. First of all, is to read the report, take the time to read the report, and then if there are, in those incidences when the community or family members call for support, to attend a vigil or a walk or a march, to do that. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort to do that. Just be in support of those that are doing the work. If you have time to volunteer for Mama Bear Clan or Bear Clan to do the community support, that's also good.
For sure. Definitely just taking initiative, right? And I think one of the misconceptions too is that you have to be Indigenous, right? Or you have to have some kind of tie to those organizations to get involved. Take action, take initiative, and contact those people. Take a Google, and if you see it on Facebook or a posting where they're saying that a march is happening, everybody is welcome to those marches. It's not just, you don't need to know the people that are there or have some connection to them. Just go and show support. Super, super important. And it's a really basic suggestion, right? Because I think everybody can do that. If you can get out, put your masks on, I guess. We should say put your masks on and be safe, because most of those events now are socially distanced. So, but yeah, so we are wrapping up. So I'm hoping to hear a final message from you, Sandra.
Well, I think finally, what's really important is to support those that are doing the work. I know working with the coalition and with the families, they say nothing for us without us.
Right.
So, be a participant, be an ally, and allow your presence to amplify those voices.
For sure. Definitely. What a great message. Did you also want to give your information if anybody wants to connect with you in regards to?
Okay, so I am on Facebook.
Everybody's on Facebook. Perfect.
Yeah, that's about the best way to get a hold of me. Just
Okay.
Sandra Delaronde on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sandra. I'm so happy to welcome you as the first speaker in this series. Honestly, you have just such great information, and you've been doing so much work in this field. Like, I can't thank you enough. So grateful to have you here. And also thank you for the work that you continue to do. Always interested to see what you're coming up with next. I really enjoyed your course as well. The 231 calls to justice. So for the listeners out there, please do take a look, give it a Google. I'm sure you can find that information if you're interested in taking that course. Connect with MDP, Tamara Stout, I believe it. Tamara Stout, yes. So please do come back next week. We will have another guest on to talk about MMIWG, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit People. I hope you guys found some really informative stuff here today. So please do tune in next week. This has been Tammy Wolf, the host of Truth Before Reconciliation. You are still listening to CKUW 95.9 FM here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Bye-bye.